Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Breaking the Silence, a podcast where we talk about recovery, mental health, and the struggle and the stories of people's perseverance from tragedy to triumph. My name is Alan Carlip. I am the host of Breaking the Silence, and today on the show, I would like to welcome Kenneth Markowitz. Kenneth, it's so glad to have you on here. Kenneth, recovery coach, advocate, and changing people's lives one day at a time. Kenneth, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Alan. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And just looking through your background and your experience and your history and things like that, you're a doctor.
I am, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was a pediatrician for about a little over 18 years. Took care of a lot of kids with a lot of mental health issues. Depression and anxiety and ADHD were the big ones. And also saw a lot of kids who were struggling with what we call failure to launch, which kind of starts in teenage years, sometimes even preteen years, and really can extend into early adulthood. And so I helped a lot of these kids really kind of find their direction when they were struggling to do so.
Wow, being able to, be a part of a young person's journey like that and just kind of, being an instrumental piece, to their sort of journey and helping them get to a place where they start to feel confident themselves. Because, young kids and adolescents even, when they, are developing and they're sort of, trying to figure things out, as kids too, it's especially difficult, depending on a lot of different factors, how their home life is, or how they are and how their social sort of cues are, and those kinds of things. And to see that progression or struggle and to be a part of that is just something that's probably been a big benefit for you.
Yeah, very much so. Certainly with the coaching I'm doing, and nowadays kids have a unique set of challenges that they're presented with, especially with social media and the impact that social media has on them, and really kind of seeing through a very filtered lens everyone else's life looking so wonderful, and then they compare that to their own lives. Not to mention things like bullying and just a lot of the things that used to just happen in person now happen online and all the time. Like, there's really no break to it. Really puts kids at in a unique position nowadays with regards to the mental health struggles that they have compared to certainly what I grew up with.
Yeah, if you look at the statistics, I think you've seen, especially in younger cases of children and young adolescents, mental health has become such a big impact and such a big topic of conversation because of the exposure that kids have to social media nowadays, right? And I'm just looking at the statistics, and 1 in 3 children or kids or adolescents these days are dealing with or fighting some sort of difficult mental health issue. And like you said, a lot of it has to do with what they see or what they appear to think that they're seeing, and how that can play a huge impact, right? I call it toxic comparison, where I'm comparing, or someone's comparing my set of circumstances to somebody else's. And I think with kids, because they can be naive, right? They're learning, and they're growing, and they don't really know the reality of maybe what an adult has to go through on a daily basis. So when they see these they see these people on social media, or they see them, themselves, and or maybe their friends, they're finding it difficult and challenging to really keep up with that. And I think that's been a huge, I don't want to say epidemic, but definitely a problematic area that continues to increase.
Yeah, no, it's a real struggle. It's a real concern. So much so that I really think that kids really have to limit exposure to a lot of this stuff online. And it's one of the things I kind of advocate for when talking to people about using, kids using phones, kids having phones, kids having exposure to social media. And it really just kind of starts there because there's social media, and then of course there's everything else you could be exposed to online: gambling, pornography, just to name two big ones. And that's really, both of those are very concerning as well, especially now that gambling is really everywhere, with regards to a person's exposure online. It doesn't just stop at a casino anymore. You have it on your phone, you have it on your computer, you have it everywhere, on TV, as far as ads, or just having like the streamer at the bottom of a sports show, a TV sports show. They'll have just a static ad for a particular online gambling site sitting in the top right corner of the screen while you're watching. So it's a lot of this stuff is all over, and kids are being exposed to it all the time. And this is where addiction starts. We know that addiction typically starts in preteen or teen years. Just to as an example, pornography exposure on average occurs at about 11 to 13 years old, at least in the U.S. And so that's where it starts, right? Kids get exposed then; they have no idea what they're really watching. And a lot of these kids grow up to become adults who are addicted to pornography. And I know that because my generation is struggling with this too. About half of marriages are struggling with pornography to some degree. And we're talking about the 30 to 50-year-old age group that's really struggling with this. And they were in college or early 20s when the internet and pornography really kind of became a marriage. I remember when I was in college, the internet really kind of came online, for the general population to really start using, and pornography was there from the beginning. Not certainly to the same extent as it is now, but it was there, and it was not hard to find either.
I think that there's just a lot of concern because of the accessibility. Yeah. What kids are exposed to nowadays compared to maybe mine and your generation is very, very, worrisome, right? Yeah. Because, it just, the affect that, it puts into somebody's headspace, and that, because pornography, gambling, like you're right. Like I had somebody on the show last week, and we talked about the growing rapidity of sports gambling, right? And how, nowadays, when you're watching a sports show or you're watching Sportsnet or TSN or anything, they have a segment or they have a piece where they have to talk about the odds, the betting lines. Yeah. Right. This is where you go. They have Bet365, sports interactions, MGM, all of these websites online, and in commercials where it's giving people, the ability or the accessibility to put it into their head that this is something that you can enjoy doing. And it's funny because they'll, represent or communicate or talk about the lines, and then at the bottom, as it's talking about it, it's saying, have a problem with gambling, call this number. So it's like it's like giving an addict some more drugs, but then they're saying, if you have a problem, call this number, but here you go.
Right, exactly. It's a very interesting juxtaposition. I totally agree. On the one hand, we're adding fuel to the fire, and then on the other hand, we're trying to put it out. But we're trying to put it out with a bucket of water, and this is like a huge forest fire that's raging. I think it's there's a lot of dare I say hypocrisy when it comes to this. But yeah, nowadays with gambling, especially, I get very concerned about the coupling gambling with sports, and not just sports gambling. It's really there's a true enmeshment. When ESPN has their own gambling apps, and when stadiums are being sponsored by online gambling companies, it goes beyond just someone talking about the line for a particular game online or on a sports show. It really speaks to saying that gambling's okay, sports are okay, and now we're saying gambling's okay because now gambling is really part of sports. So it really sends a very strong message that that it's okay to be involved with these activities. And if you happen to have an addiction to them, well, here's some help for you.
Yeah.
It's that's what I find very concerning about it these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, and I do hope that there is, enough resources out there to help. Like I know, for us as a private treatment facility center, like, the ongoing amount of phone calls and, people reaching out and saying like, gambling has been such a big, piece of my addiction nowadays. And, it's just, it's becoming more frequent, and we're hearing and seeing more cases where people are really, really starting to, struggle and reach out for help. So, hopefully, for these younger generation, kids and adolescents, there is the, the resources that are needed. But, what do you think that we, as a society can do to sort of limit that exposure, or is there anything that we can do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's become so accepted within society. I think the most important thing is education. We really have to educate really everyone, not just the young population, the teenagers, the preteens, and the college students or college age kids about the dangers of addiction, but really you see addiction across the board, right? You see it really at any age group, and education can happen at any age. So it doesn't have to begin and end with our youth, but it definitely needs to begin with our youth. That's for sure. So I think education is really the key. I think that there are certain legislative acts that can be taken. Certainly, in the U.S. before pornography, for example, landed online, you couldn't walk into an adult bookstore, or adult video store if you were under 21. So that really limited exposure. It didn't eliminate exposure, but it limited it substantially. Well, so the same thing can happen online, and age verification requirements, I think, are really important. But there's a lot of pushback against that. And so it hasn't really gone as far as it necessarily needs to. And so that's why we have the average age of exposure is 11 to 13 when it comes to pornography. So I think that, education is number one. Legislation, I think, needs to be number two. And it has to be thoughtful legislation. Because, there are balancing struggles there. The argument I hear against any sort of legislation is freedom of speech. Okay, so you can make that argument, but at the same time, we can protect our youth.
Yeah, I agree. And, and that's kind of where I think, when you talk about, professional standards and being able to be of support, I think that's where you've sort of come into, do what you do, right? And, for the average viewer, the average listener that is listening and just kind of, hearing about all of this, what would you say is process addiction to you? Because we've been talking about
Sure.
some of it already.
Yeah, we've been kind of already talking about it. Process addictions, also known as behavioral addictions, are those addictions where a person's addicted to a behavior or an activity as opposed to a substance, with the exception of food, because food's a substance. So, for example, pornography, gambling, food, shopping, gaming, internet, social media, these are all types of process addictions that people struggle with. And so the reason that there's some controversy as to whether some of these are truly addictions or not. And really right now, the DSM, which is the sort of like the quote unquote Bible for psychological conditions, only recognizes gambling as a true addiction. But all of these behaviors follow, for someone who has traits of addiction with regards to these behaviors, they all follow a very similar pattern. Addiction follows a cycle, and that cycle is relatively predictable. And for someone who is struggling with addiction, they also typically are dealing with the same traits with regards to their behavior. It's uncontrollable. It's compulsive behavior. It results in craving. And it also is behavior that a person engages in despite the consequences. We call that the 4 C's of addiction. And so you see that with these behavioral addictions too, along with the predictable cycle that typically happens with addiction. So while the DSM may not recognize these addictions yet as true addictions, we talk about them as addictions because they really follow a predictable addiction process.
Yeah, like that cycle of, I'm allowing things like even shopping, for example, it's making my life unmanageable, but here I am, constantly buying things, right? And that's where it's like that compulsive, pattern of like, it's just a repetition over and over despite, personal consequences. And it's definitely something that gives people the ability to sort of, I guess you can say, suppress emotions, or how they deal with anxiety or stress or good feelings, bad feelings, all of those things, right? And we talk about sort of your experience in this field. What is it that you, as a professional, do to sort of continue to, tell people that, hey, this is something that you need to look out for?
Yeah. So what I do primarily is one-on-one coaching. So for someone who may be struggling with an addiction, my goal is to help, generally speaking, help people with 3 different elements. There's understanding what addiction is, understanding how the addiction cycle and the addiction process applies to that person specifically, because addiction plays out differently in each person who is struggling with addiction. And so it's important for a person to understand their unique situation and relationship with the addiction. And then the third big area that we focus on is relapse prevention. And with coaching, the key is not just sitting and talking about it. It's about putting this into daily use. It's all about action. So we talk about the underpinnings of addiction because that's crucial to get into. But at the end of the day, we want to take all that information and say, how are you going to work with all this information and stay sober and live in recovery, which are not necessarily the same thing. They actually aren't the same thing. But how are you going to live a life of recovery every day so that you don't end up falling back into the old bad habits that you were living with before? So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. And the nice thing about coaching, in addition to that action that we focus on, is that for me, and my coaching style, I'm not about like, okay, let's meet once a week and we're done. We meet and talk as much as necessary for my clients to really feel that they're moving in the right direction. So at the beginning, I could be meeting with clients once a day, and then have texting or phone calls either on the same day or in between sessions. So there's a lot of back and forth with regards to the communication between me and my clients. And really the goal is just to get them on the right path and keep them there.
Yeah, no, that's so, and I think that and nowadays, I mean, at least in, my own experience working in this field and, working with people that are struggling with addiction every day, being a coach or a recovery coach is something that is so, it's so important to have for people, right? Because, taking them into the treatment process and, allowing them to sort of build the awareness, build the toolkit, build those skills that they need to take when they leave here is great. Yeah. But then, we find that, when they do leave, they do have support. We do have all those things, but sometimes you just need a little bit of that piece of accountability where somebody's
Right.
able to check in with them. How are you doing? What's going on today? What is it that you're going to be doing today that's going to help you stay in recovery, right? Because you are right. There's a big difference between being abstinent and being in recovery, right? And recovery, I think, is a lifestyle, and it's a lifestyle
Right.
of instinctual change and change to progress for the better, because it's really learning how to be uncomfortable, being uncomfortable in the beginning.
Right. No,
And that's such an
absolutely.
important piece, right? And that's where the accountability, that extra support comes in. So,
Right.
it's so important that you're able to do that for your clients. In your experience so far, doing this coaching and being a coach and being a supportive person for somebody, what do you find that people struggle with the most, or what do you see that is, something
Yeah.
that's a consistent sort of pattern within their struggle?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really kind of depends where a person is in their process. So at the very beginning, I find that the struggle is really kind of centers on the ongoing cravings they may be dealing with, and also sometimes accepting accountability and really dedicating themselves to true change. And a lot of times people, they'll come and they're like, okay, I have, a problem with whatever addiction they have. And they're like, I just don't want to use it anymore. I just don't want to do this anymore. Okay, that's step one. But how are you going to change your life so that you really don't go back to relying on those issues? Because, the substance or behavior that a person's addicted to, that's the surface level. That's the Band-Aid that they're putting on their problem, right? But their problem is really far deeper. And so that really needs to be addressed, and those underlying issues need to be changed over time. And so I find at the beginning, those early stages, I find a lot of people have trouble either understanding that or accepting that. As people go on, if they're already in recovery and they've been sober, a couple of things that really kind of come up are challenges with complacency. That I find is a real challenge, because a lot of people, they get to a point where it's like, okay, I got this. I'm good with my recovery and my sobriety. I can start cheating a little bit. I don't have to worry as much or be as vigilant with my recovery as I was, let's say, 6 months ago. And that's when people let their guards down. That's where they start getting themselves into trouble again.
Yeah.
And so I find that the maintenance part is just as important, especially when someone gets to that point where they've really kind of worked on themselves and made significant changes. So it's maintaining those changes that are really challenging.
Yeah.
So I find that that's a real challenge. And then I was going to mention another one. I totally forgot.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Complacency is huge, right? Because
Yeah.
this is the only real, I guess if you want to classify addiction as a disease, I mean, we do. This is the only one that tells you that, in your mind, that you're okay. Everything is okay. You're good.
Right.
Right. I've done a lot of work on myself. I can go back to, a little bit here, a little bit there. It's, and then, for a little bit, that might be okay. And then, eventually you fall back into that same pattern. Matter of fact, you fall into even a worse pattern than when you started initially, when you first reached out for help, right? So cutting, baffling, and powerful.
Exactly.
Kenneth, if you can kind of say one last thing to the audience and the viewers that we have listening today, what would that be? Maybe for themselves, maybe it's for the younger generation, that is sort of coming up and being exposed to, everything that we're talking about today. What would that message be?
Yeah, so I think so. I focus a lot on process addiction in general, and so I think it's important for people to educate themselves about what process addictions are and the dangers that they can result in. So it's like we talk about the consequences of addiction. Well, process addictions have some serious consequences. For example, shopping can lead to shoplifting. Gambling, of course, can lead to financial ruin. even eating can lead to heart disease and can lead to diabetes, which are very serious conditions and the major causes of morbidity and mortality in the U.S. Pornography can lead to either child pornography or inappropriate conversations online. It could also lead to inappropriate interactions in person, like frequenting prostitution, or leading to frequenting massage parlors, which in the U.S. is both are still illegal by and large. So it could really have significant life consequences. And so they shouldn't be taken lightly. When we talk about addiction, we often talk about alcoholism and substance use disorders. And of course, those have serious consequences with life, but so can these process disorders. And so I think it's important to recognize those and to really start educating our kids about the dangers of things they can find online specifically, and to really start using the internet as a tool, and our phones as a tool, as opposed to a way to kind of quote unquote veg out at the end of the day and really just kind of mindlessly scroll through whatever social media that people are using. So I think that's probably the last message I would say with regards to the topic.
I love it. I mean, it's like, use your phone, use the computer, use the platform that you have as an ally rather than a weapon, right? Because there's sort of a crossroad there where you can use that for those things, or you can actually use it to sort of educate yourself and get yourself into a place where you know that, I don't want this to be a problematic area in my life anymore, or even entertain that idea. So yeah, I love that message, and thank you so much. So you're listening to Breaking the Silence. Dr. Kenneth Markowitz, recovery coach, health advocate, and a leader in the process addiction field. Thank you so much for joining the show and being a guest with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.